become acquainted with you, they get to know you, they get to know your ministry, and they can be developed into donors. Some of the disadvantages of individuals, though, particularly if you're doing it totally from scratch, is they're costly to develop. If you're trying to just do mass mailings to get donors, we estimate it costs over $1 a letter, an appeal letter. So if you've got an extensive list, that gets pretty expensive, and you've got to get a lot of money in to recoup that if you send out, let's say, 1,000 letters. It's work. Writing appeals takes time, it takes energy. You've got to constantly work at it to keep fresh. You can't use the same appeal month after month. You've got to change it over a lot so that it stays fresh and interesting. Same thing with your newsletters. And you often get a small return per individual giver. We had a discussion, actually, it was the CFO of Plow Again, who was talking to this guy that said, oh yeah, I support 100 different ministries and I give them all $25 a year. And what David told them was, you're really costing ministries money if you're only doing that, because by the time we mail out everything, process everything, we spend well more than $25 to get that $25. So it would be much better to bless somebody with $250 or $1,000 and do it to just a couple of ministries than send a bunch of checks of $25 to a bunch of ministries. Another thing about individual fundraising, particularly when you're doing the one-on-one ask, is it feels real risky. Unless you're experienced at it, if you do an ask and they turn you down, that's rejection. And what is rejection? Rejection hurts. So there is some risk there for the inexperienced. So you have to kind of develop a little bit of a thick skin so that you can handle those no's that you will inevitably get from time to time. And you sometimes need significant assistance from the board of directors and volunteers to develop those individuals. And again, that points back to the importance of having a good board. Another and sometimes overlooked source of fund is foundations. And foundations oftentimes can be a good source of significant funds. If you are a foundation, one of the things a lot of people don't know is that they have to give away 3% of their income every year, or maybe their assets every year, to maintain their foundation status. So they definitely have money to give away, and they have to give it away. So if you can tap into foundations, that's great. And there's resources and libraries. There's volumes this thick of all the foundations. There are corporate foundations, there are individual and family foundations. So tap into that. I was talking to Chris Laurie over breakfast, and he was able to get a matching grant recently from Mission Increase. So that's one good potential foundation lead for you. An advantage of working with foundations is that they often have professional staffs. So they can help you. They generally have very clear guidelines of what they're looking for and the sorts of things that they fund, so that helps steer you into the right foundations. If it's a foundation that wants to do education in the third world, that's probably not one that you want to go after. So, but they all generally have pretty clear and well-published guidelines as the sorts of things they do and do not fund. They also are likely to require some due diligence and research your requests. So you can't just bluff them and fill your request with a lot of fluff, because they are going to do a little bit of delving into your background. Having a little bit of track record before you go off for that first foundation grant is usually helpful. But once you start getting a track record established, getting some grants, meeting the goal of the grant, and then documenting that to the first foundation gives you some better ammunition as you go after future foundations. Some of the disadvantages of foundations are usually they only give you money for non-operating purposes. So if you go to a foundation and you say, I need $5,000 a month to meet payroll, they're going to say, you should be doing that on your own. But if you go to a foundation and say, hey, I want to start another skate ministry 10 miles down the road, and I need $10,000 for ramps and some asphalt, they may well likely fund that. Oftentimes, however, with foundations, they don't just give you a blank check for $10,000. They may say, we'll give you $5,000 if you raise $5,000. So those are called matching grants. And we're finding more and more that foundations tend to wrap their grants around the concept of matching grants, so that you do some of the work, but they will double or essentially cause whatever you get raised to be doubled. So that's just what many of them are starting to do now. It can be a long process. I know in my role as the operation director for Mike Silva, we're working to try to get a foundation grant for a donor management software package. And we've been working on that 6 months, and it's probably another at least 3 to 4 months before we'll know whether or not we get the money. It's sort of a pre-grant process where you kind of sketch out what it is that you want the money for, then they green light you to actually do the formal request, at least for this particular foundation. So when you're going after foundations, you have to allow a lot of time. It can be difficult to access foundations through personal influence. In the next slide, we'll talk about corporate sponsorships. You have a much better chance using relationships with corporations than you do with foundations. And there's oftentimes rigorous reporting requirements. They really want to see how you use the money, and they will hold you accountable to the results that you're saying you're going to get from the money that you've asked for. A third church source of funds is churches. Of course, those of you who are associated with a church, that's kind of a no-brainer. You're already getting your money from the church. But those of you who aren't part of a church, who have a standalone ministry of some sort, churches can often be a good source of funds. Missionaries, of course, use churches a lot. But an advantage is not only if you can get them to help you financially, they will generally also support you in prayer. They want to see your prayer letters. Oftentimes you can get access to home groups, which gives you another source of individuals. And it's obviously easier to have a relationship with the church if you have an in with the church. So either you know the pastor, know the youth pastor, know the missions pastor, or have a good relationship with a member, and maybe the member is a board member. Disadvantages of churches: one, if there's a staff turnover, if your advocate is the missions pastor and the mission pastor goes to another church, oftentimes your source of funds dry up very quickly. And you also need to just fit in with their ministry and geographic focus, whatever that might be. Finally, a fourth source of funds are corporate sponsorships. If you've got a standalone skate ministry or maybe a skate park ministry, corporate sponsorships may well be a very, very good way of going. I noticed there's some banners out here at this skate park where I'm assuming Calvary Chapel is getting at least a little bit of money from some corporate sponsors. But again, just like foundations, corporations, if they've got Christian owners, can be a real significant source of funding if the people who control the purse strings can catch your vision. And here's another case where the personal connections are real helpful. So if you can befriend a Christian business leader that has a business that is capable of giving a corporate sponsorship, that relationship can then turn into some regular cash flow for you. Some of the disadvantages are, of course, the bigger the business, it's harder to get around the staff. I know when Luis Palau has tried to do some festivals and has sought some corporate sponsorships, it seems like we do much better with the local auto dealership than with Coca-Cola. You know, Coca-Cola, next thing you know, you're down in Atlanta trying to wow your way through headquarters, finding just the right person who's going to give you a sponsorship. And having that Christian label off when you're at some big secular concern is sometimes really, really hard to get. There are exceptions. We had one company that we were really surprised at that gave us a significant amount of money for one of our festivals. And when we asked why, they said, well, Christians have to buy groceries too. There's a big major grocery chain. Another disadvantage is that to get the money, whatever you're doing needs to be within their guidelines and their target demographics. And finally, local businesses tend to prefer and support local events and projects, but I think many of you are location-based, whether you're in the Rocky Mountains or southern Florida or whatever. So, I would really go after some of these corporate things.